About think act do. Now, as I kind of say, I like to do a lot of things by learning about how I think about stuff, and that's essentially how I learn. I will overanalyze just about anything in this world. I am having arguments with myself for events that happened 20 years ago, and that's kind of a thing, right? And think act do is kind of a process in certain forms of therapy that can really help you at work. So, yes, you can bring therapy into your work environment because it will give you tools on how to manage things that are otherwise kind of hard to manage. So, think, act, do again with behavioral therapy, with therapy to kind of figure out why you do the things you do or why you think the way you think. The idea here is trying to define what the real problem is here, right? So, what are the realistic options? What's your path? What does this look like for you going from point A to point B? Then the other one is act. You want to plan that action, plan out the best option, see how things could go down. Because remember, we do scenario plan. There's never just one answer to a problem. And then do commit to that action or the path forward, but be flexible enough in case new data comes in or something changes. So this is kind of that interesting process on how we take cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy into the workplace. And we put it in different language like think, act, do, so we can kind of more focus on what we do, because I've had some really interesting managers, and I'm sure you are having really interesting managers too. So for me, right, one of the easiest way to derail me is to throw a lot of things at me, like six or more things all at once. If they're all different, especially if they're all different, I'm a scenario planner, so I try to think my way through all these, try to do a path. So I will slow down, right? And this happens if there are too many options or too many different paths. So again, you're trying to figure out the best one. But the cool part about this, if you throw six or more things all at once, this is a really neat way of unsettling a team or unsettling a potential leader rival to buy time. And it is very effective on how this works. So for you to make this less effective for that kind of chaos leadership, think, act, do gives you that better option, because now things become more manageable. Right. And it really is about emotional control. It's about controlling your emotions at work or getting your boss to try to get you to do something or say something you didn't mean to. Right. So this is one of the harder things to do. This is really hard for humans, all of us, because we tend or want to react in the moment. And sometimes we skip through the whole thinking process. They'll come in and they'll say, you're really a lousy worker, Dan. And all of a sudden, boom, okay, there's a fighting word, so I'm going to take you on. And then you see your manager smirk. Have you ever seen your manager smirk? I've seen my manager smirk. I've seen my manager smirk a lot, sometimes, especially when they got what they wanted from you. They want to see that look of shock or upset, that emotional reaction on your part was what they were looking for you. Now, if your manager comes up to you and says, man, you're a lousy worker, Dan, and say, okay, well, what's your example? That flips it back on them, right? Now, you can obviously tell because I came up with that answer really quick. I've been here more than once. So you're flipping this back around. Okay, well, can you give me a concrete example? And if they can't, or if they give you some BS, then you know it's all about them, that they're just being a dork all day long. This is their problem. It has nothing to do with you. It has their issue written all over it. Now, the other thing that makes this think, act, do model work is that it really is a learned skill. It's something I learn every day. It's something I apply to things every day. It really is my way of pulling back and taking a deep breath. Now, the good part is that we've seen this done so many times, I kind of know where my triggers are. And you'll learn these over time, right? You just know when to just stop and let it wash all over you, especially if your manager's coming in, he's being a dork all day long. He's not being happy, not being friendly, not being supportive. This is a skill that you're going to take time and energy to build. But wow, once you have this skill, you become bulletproof at work. You become really invincible when someone's trying to emotionally take advantage of you. And your boss will, right? Again, it's the easiest way to get to somebody is through their emotions and emotional self-regulation. It is absolutely 100% the best way to manipulate a human being. So there are some things you can do. Now, this is kind of interesting. Healthy thinking, this is hard because we are our own worst critic. We are our own worst person. When it comes to us, we tend to not give ourselves a lot of slack. So that healthy thinking part of this is that you know what you are, even if the delivery is poor. There might be a takeaway here. Okay, I'm the worst employee ever. Well, why? And if he gives us nonsense, cannot point to a discrete or concrete event at the time, then the takeaway here is that my boss is a jerk. If he has something concrete, I can say, okay, well, your delivery is poor, but I can probably kind of take that in. Hey, do you have an idea on how I can fix this and be more in line with your expectations of what you think? right? The other one too is you don't need to suffer abuse. And I love this one because this works really, really well with customer management, and you can flip this around on your manager as well, right? So if your manager is screaming and yelling, has completely honking lost it, and I have seen managers do this, right? Pull back into your customer service role, pull back into that, and just really quietly and very calmly. And if there's cameras in the office, make sure you grab a copy of the tape from the security department. You seem really upset right now. You know, it looks like you need some time to cool down, maybe take a deep breath, maybe step back a little bit. Let's pick this up when you are more in charge of yourself. Now, if they absolutely freaking lose it on that one, more power to you. You flipped it back to them. But the idea is not to react, but to try to defuse the situation, try to be as calm and as rational as possible, right? Now, you're going to walk away from that. You're going to be shaking. You're going to be upset. You're going to have a lot of other things going on in your mind. You're going to be like going, how dare they? Who is this person to tell me this? What the heck is going on? Go do something fun. Seriously, just go do something fun that will consume those brain cycles, because you're going to argue this for the next 50 years in your head, right? You can try to be present in the moment. You can try to just take this as a moment in time and push it aside. But we're going to dwell on this. We really are. Yeah, and you know you will. We all will do this because we all wanted to try to figure out what triggered this person. What did I do? We grow up and we develop some pretty unhealthy coping mechanisms between school and family and the life events that we have around us, right? So trying to be present in the moment and just trying to treat this as a data point, really important, but good skill to learn. Again, remember documentation. And if there's security, if there's a camera in the security office, if for your work area, go to human resources and see if you can get a copy of that security tape. They're going to ask you all sorts of questions, or they'll go and they'll look at that security tape. And that security tape can lead to some really interesting reactions inside the office, especially if it was unearned and undeserving and your boss really was screaming and yelling at you. You know, the other thing too that makes this really interesting is we all have cell phones now, and we're all really quick to whip those things out when someone's misbehaving in public. And that happens in the office too. Check and see if your coworker recorded that. Now, sometimes though, you do need a review. You do need to kind of sit back and try to figure out where your boss is coming from. So review cycles are actually really, really stressful, right? And this is another good point for Think, Act, Do, because they are stressful, especially when you don't get feedback on a regular basis. So there was like one time where I didn't even have an annual performance review for like 2 years, right? And then I finally get one, and I find out that I'm doing okay, but there are some things that were really getting on my boss's nerves. Now, for 2 years, they didn't tell me this, so I'm not going to fix it. I don't know, right? So if you're there, you're not sure how it's going to go, you got no feedback for the year, you need to stop, take a breath, review, prepare, just mentally get into that space where you can take it and you're like, oh, well, if I'm really that big a pain and I'm really causing you this much misery in your job, why didn't you tell me this for 2 years? Right? I mean, honestly, right? Sometimes it's not about you. It's really about your boss. And then your boss is going to turn around and say, I'm the best boss ever. All right, so this is story time, right? Sometimes you have a project, and I really think this is funny when you have two projects with competing kind of processes, and then we come to realize we need to prioritize for shifting processes. But sometimes it makes for an interesting work story. So let's talk about the best boss ever that I had. So I'm doing a job, middle management, I'm having a good time. And I'm working on a project for the senior VP of the company. Now, this is an important project, and my boss reports to that senior VP, so my boss is interested in me finishing this. Now, one of the neat tricks is that we would sometimes book 2 or 3 or 4 meetings at the same time as we're doing something else. So this would be meeting on top of meeting on top of meeting, because we didn't have very much calendar organization or very much calendar discipline. So this other manager, not in my direct chain of command, more dotted line, made a meeting in the middle of me working on this senior VP's project. And he's just a manager. He's the same manager as my boss, right? So procedurally, organizationally, my senior VP is way more important than this other manager. But this other manager really thought I needed to learn how to do budgeting, really thought I needed to learn this right now. And booked the meeting, double booked my time. So I'm working on my project for my senior manager. I did not go to this other boss's meeting. Again, dotted line. Kind of sort of maybe had to report to him, but I was more working with his people than working with him. So kind of on that process. So he starts trying to get hold of me through Teams. Hey, why aren't you in my meeting? Oh, I'm working on this project for the senior VP. No, you need to be in this meeting right now. I said, well, record it for me. I'll catch up, because you're doing this every day for the next week. I'll just catch up at some other meeting. And he got really upset. So it kept on war dialing me over Teams. So I finally just turned down all the notifications on Teams and then started war dialing me on my phone. So I just kept on dumping him to voicemail. And he got really upset. I mean, like really upset that I would have the temerity to blow him off. How dare I blow him off? Well, I'm working on a project for a senior VP and you're just a manager, right? Very simple, easy kind of thing. But because he got so deregulated, he got so upset that I would not come to his meeting because I'm working on a project for a senior VP, he got even more and more spun up. Now, I probably shouldn't have turned off Teams. I probably shouldn't have turned off and put it on my phone or anything else. But the fact that this guy got so upset that he was war dialing me, literally war dialing me to try to get me to come to his meeting for how to do a budget when he was going to do it for the next 5 days, really kind of set that tone and that mood with that manager. Right? Me and that manager were never going to be friends after this, right? If anything, to go along with it. So he lost emotional control. He was not think, acting, doing. He was just doing. I'm trying to ignore him to the best of my ability because I need to get this job done for the senior VP. So I finally got the job for the senior VP done, turned around and joined his meeting the next day. And boy, was he burned. He was really angry with me, wouldn't engage, wouldn't talk, all the rest of it. So how you handle yourself in that situation was kind of like, okay, whatever. That's what I did. I just said, okay, whatever. It's his job. He's fine. He's not a big deal. I'm in his meeting now and I'll be there for the rest of the week. This should teach you never to try to double book me. And it ended up being that, the guy eventually moved on to another job and all the rest of it. But it was just really interesting because his words the next week in a team meeting were, I'm the best boss ever. I really care about my people and they have the slack to do their jobs. When you know for a fact that the manager was really upset with you last week because you were working on a job for a senior VP and you didn't come to his meeting on budgetary control processes. But he really thought he was the best boss ever. He wasn't connecting that war dialing as a negative behavior. He really honestly thought he was the best boss ever. And he would talk about how he was the best boss ever all the time. And you kind of learn to deal with the hypocriticality of the whole thing, right? He just didn't see that his actions could lead to a negative consequence. So he was stuck in that do cycle. He just did things. He didn't really care what the fallout was. So that's why the think, act, do is so important for us inside the lower levels of an organization. Sometimes we have to exhibit control over things and over our own emotions that our bosses simply just haven't learned how to do yet. So it makes for an interesting day, especially when you see them being a hypocrite right through the entire board. Now, there's some key takeaways from Think, Act, Do, right? This is a real common kind of therapy process, but wow, does it give you a lot of control over a situation, especially if your boss doesn't have the same skill set. If you have more skills than your boss, this actually works really, really well, right? So if you are being emotionally manipulated by your manager, you do have the right to set boundaries. You can say, if you're screaming and yelling at me, you look like you're out of control, you need to stop, or let's take a break so we can get some time together. And that may spin your boss up even more, but that's really kind of a good thing, especially if it's in public, right? If it's behind a door-closed office, man, just go in there with your cell phone recording, especially if you think it's going to go south. Go in there with your cell phone recording. Honest to God, 100%. Do this all the time. It just will save you in the long run, right? You have to control your own reactions through Think, Act, Do, even if your boss is absolutely tripping out the wall about everything. But you want that documentation. You really do. Because if it becomes a pattern, if this is who they are and how they are, or leadership through fear, other kind of negative leadership traits, man, it's not you. It is absolutely 100% them. And they may be best boss ever, but they're also a hypocrite. So that's your big takeaway, right? Make sure you've got documentation of this. You've got a cell phone. Make sure you're secretly recording this stuff. You don't have to show them the screen. Just make sure you're recording this stuff. And that's pretty straightforward, whether it's through memo, voice command, or through just taking a video, right? And the more you can set up a pattern, the more information you have on this, the more you can take control of that situation. If it's a one-off, okay, you can give them that. And you can tell them, no, this isn't appropriate to deal with me like this. And you have that right. But if it's a pattern, there's something different. Because if you cost the company money, If that leader is costing the company money, that's a problem.